go. So this is the second of our congregational financial review workshops. We held the first one on Saturday and we had 18 people attend that one. And tonight we're going to spend time just going through kind of the basics of why we do a financial review and what are some of the steps that you follow. I did send out links to the documents that I'll refer to in advance. So that, I don't know if that's helpful to have in advance. Some of them are kind of overwhelming. At least the ELCA audit guide is a bit overwhelming. So if you've looked at that and thought, what have I gotten into? Don't worry, we're gonna kind of touch on that and help you understand it a little bit more. For those of you who may be pastors or just interested parties who may not be someone who's doing the financial review in your congregation, but responsible to make sure it happens, please know that there's going to be language and words in here that you may look at and go, I don't know what she's talking about. So, and just know that you don't have to understand all of this. It's a process, and there's, this is just to kind of give you the framework of it. And I'm always here if you have questions afterwards that you didn't think of tonight. So, for those who don't know me, I'm Terri Robertson, and I serve as the Executive Assistant for Accounting and Communications for our Synod, and I've served with the Synod since 1999. And prior to that, I was a controller for a property management firm here in Orange County. So just a lot of experience prior to working with the Synod in the for-profit world, and found when I started working here that the nonprofit and specifically the church related area is a bit different. So, and if you just excuse me for a minute, I'm going to close my office door so the sun from across the hall doesn't keep beaming in. So hold for just a moment. Okay, that's better. So I'm going to open in prayer. We will also close our time in prayer. And as any good youth leader does, at the end, I'm going to invite somebody to pray. And I'm pretty good at waiting until somebody steps up. So start thinking now if you might feel like you want to do that, because I'll be asking. So let's pray. Gracious and Heavenly Father, we give thanks for all those on this call tonight, all those who couldn't be here, who do this important work in their congregations, and who work with those doing this work. We know, God, that often we're overwhelmed with the things we're asked to do and we don't feel capable or qualified, but we know that you give us what we need to do the work that we're called to do. Bless our time together, help us to be able to walk away with some better understanding and just to be thankful for all that you've given us and to be stewards of in our congregations. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm going to share my screen. Pastor Jennifer Zano is here with us. She's going to help me kind of monitor questions and things like that, especially as we spill onto multiple pages. The way this will work is I'm going to share some in sections. So I'll share a presentation. If you have questions during that time, I encourage you either to write them down or put them in the chat. And then we'll take a break for some questions, and then we'll go back to the presentation. Especially since when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see, I can only see a few of you at the bottom. It will be helpful to wait for those breaks to ask the questions. But if you absolutely can't wait, there is on the bottom of your screen a reaction button, and there's a raise hand feature. And that will help us to be able to see you and say, hey, we need to answer this question right away. But if you can wait for the breaks, there's 3 of them in between. So hopefully each section will allow you the time to process what I've said and then ask those questions. So, all right. Give me a second to share this. All right. So we're going to start with the document that was sent out to you, but that is kind of the basis for what we're doing here tonight. And it's a great document that is called the ELCA Congregational Audit Guide. It has not been updated since 2017, but it's all very relevant. Not much has changed in there. This is kind of a step-by-step if you don't know how to use the ELCA website to get to resources. This is how you do it. This is how to get to the financial resources, and more specifically, the financial resources for congregations. There's a lot of resources here in addition to the audit guide, a lot of financial best practices and internal controls, some policy examples. But it's a great place to check out, especially if you're a treasurer or someone working in the financial realm of your congregation. Just good resources. And there's also, relating to this, there's also a model audit committee charter, and we'll talk a little later about what the audit committee is. There's a financial and accounting guide. And again, some sample policies and best practices, but check that out when you get a chance. Then there's another document that I sent. It's called a template, and it's labeled an audit or financial review template. You're going to hear those two terms. I'm going to interchange them a lot tonight. The ELCA, and you'll see it printed in a lot of areas, is in your constitution as well, referring to an audit. And often when you have an audit committee doing this work, it's more of what a CPA would call a financial review. And we'll talk about what the difference in that is. There's terminology, and there's some differences in the audit world, in the CPA world, that makes one a little different than the other. The document that's labeled that it's a template is something that I created when I was doing some coaching with some congregations in training their audit committees. And it's taken from the ELCA audit guide. I made the steps a little bit, what I think are a little bit easier, especially for smaller congregations, but it's based off of this ELCA audit guide. I encourage you to use both those documents. You might find some additional things in the ELCA audit guide that you might need in your congregation, or maybe explain it a little better. The ELCA is not at all aware of my document, so it's just more of an internal thing, but to me it made more sense, and it's helpful for congregations who are just starting out in this work. What is an audit? This description comes from the ELCA guide, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time tonight reading to you off my slides because you have them, but this definition, something to highlight in here is that the point of this is to provide an opinion on the reasonableness of the congregation's financial statements, so that you're able to say, yes, these are something that we feel represent an accurate picture of what our congregation's finances are. It's also to do some review of internal controls, and we'll talk about how important that is and what those are and why those matter to your committee that's looking at this stuff, because it's really the key behind doing this work. So the difference between an audit and a financial review, these are not my descriptions. These come from a CPA's website, and it's just how much of a assurance you can provide. An audit thoroughly examines all of the financial information of an organization, and it provides an opinion and providing a reasonable level of assurance. A review is an assessment of your financial statements. It's an evaluation of the financial data to provide a moderate level of assurance. If you were to go to a CPA and pay a professional firm for this, an audit would cost a whole lot more money than a financial review. And more often than not, if you're doing something in-house, it's more of a financial review than an audit. Not something to get hung up in, but I just watch calling something an audit in front of an actual professional accountant firm, because there's a connotation that comes with that. So why would a congregation want to have an audit or financial review? First of all, the ELCA strongly recommends that this be done annually. They cannot require it, because if they were to require it, they would have to have some way of enforcing that. The same with the Synod. The Synod doesn't require it, but strongly recommends that this be done annually. And some things to remember, this is not about distrust of the good people doing the work in your congregations, but it's showing responsibility, that you care about the gifts that you're given. You're providing good stewardship and modeling that for your congregation to see, that you care about what they give, and you want to make sure that you use those gifts in the best way possible. It also is a way of protecting people, protecting the people doing the work. Especially in a lot of our smaller congregations, there are few people doing that work, and we want to make sure that they're protected, that people can't question what they're doing unwarranted, and put them in a position where they might feel like they're not trusted. You want to protect the congregation's reputation, and you want to build confidence and trust in what is given to you. There provides assurances, and it provides checks and balances for what is received in your congregation and what is expended by your congregation. So that said, we're going to take our first break for any questions on just these basics behind church audit or financial review. And if you have questions, feel free to either raise your hand or just unmute or put them in the chat.
Yeah, this is Daryl. I guess then, to be clear, based on what you said, if we follow your template, as you put it, along with the ELCA guidelines, and do what I guess really is more of a financial review, we're still constitutionally what's the word I'm groping for?
Your guidelines with the Constitution.
We're fulfilling our obligation for the Constitution by doing that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And reviews and audits can look very different in different congregations, so there is no, these are guidelines for what things to look at and review, and they're done in very many different ways, and a lot will depend on the knowledge and the expertise of the people doing the work. Someone who has a lot of familiarity with finances and numbers will be able to go in depth more than someone who is just doing this for the first time, or maybe has some basic understanding but not much more than that. So, and we'll talk about ways congregations can do this this work, and sometimes even rotate in every so often a professional firm, especially for larger congregations. You might want to do that every third or fifth year, just to make sure that things are looked at with a little bit more intent. All right, any other questions before we move on to the next part? All right. All right, so we're gonna move on. So an audit committee is provided for and described in the ELCA model constitution. And this is the section in chapter 13 that describes what a I would call it a model audit committee, what the perfect audit committee would look like. And know that the ELCA model constitution has sections that are required provisions, and other sections that when your congregation updates their constitution, they may decide to leave out. This is one that they could decide to leave out. I don't know many who do, but it is not a required provision of the model constitution. But it is set some pretty stringent guidelines. 3 voting members elected by congregational councils. They're not to be members of the council, and you should stagger those 3 years. So just 1 new person is elected every year. I can tell you in congregations I've either served with or done reviews for or just known about, this is not usually how it happens. So it's like a perfect world scenario, and it would be great if you could do that. And it provides for continuity. It provides for people to rotate off. It's also not super common that people last 3 years in wanting to do this work. They may agree to do it for 1 year or maybe a couple years, but this is kind of something to aspire to if it can happen. And having those audit committee members be elected is great. At the very least, if you're not electing them, but you're appointing them, make sure they're appointed at a council meeting and it's noted in the minutes who is going to be on your audit committee, even if they're serving for just that 1 year. And these
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sorry, Siri thinks I'm talking to her. An audit committee.
It's okay.
An audit committee is meant to provide oversight and reasonable assurance of good stewardship. And so that is the point, that audit committee charter that I referred to in the opening slide, and I'll send you that at the end of after this workshop. It's a pretty detailed document, but it's good if someone says, well, what exactly are you asking me to do? What are my responsibilities for being on this committee? So the options that congregations have is you can have a professional audit conducted by an independent accounting firm. You can have an internal audit or financial review performed by independent members of the congregation with some accounting or financial background. It's not really an area you can throw someone in who just says, yeah, I'm not good with numbers, and hope that they can just figure it out. Just like you wouldn't do that typically and have your treasurer be someone. You have to have some at least comfortability with numbers and understanding of financial processes. And independent members mean they can't already be involved in other financial processes in your congregation. They can't be your financial secretary or your treasurer or even one of your counters, because they're already involved in a part of the financial process. And so this is one of the bigger challenges for our small congregations, where you may not have a whole lot of people who have some financial knowledge or background, and they may already be involved in those financial processes. So it would be difficult for them to review. They can't review the books because they are involved in the process. What is a good method is some combination of the two, rotate a professional audit with an internal review, 2 or 3 years, or, maybe whatever you determine, but every so often you get that professional firm in there if you can at all afford that. And then who can perform this? We've talked a little bit about this. The second bullet point, you want to be real with people about the time involved in doing this work. What really determines how much time is spent is the organization and the completeness of the files that they're looking at. So there's always some work that's done by whoever keeps those files, whether it be a bookkeeper or an accountant who's paid in your congregation, or a volunteer or your office administrator. the more organized and complete those files are, the less time your audit committee will have to spend trying to find things or make sense of things. But it does take time, and often that work is best done on site at the church. So there's a little bit of coordination with schedules as to, you know, when they need to be there at the church to do this work and when somebody's there to be with them. Something that can be done is that small congregations that are in the same area, if they can't find independent people in their congregation to review their own books, they can do a swap with another local congregation, you know, and say, our financial people will review your books and your financial people could review ours. And then you've got people with the financial understanding. Takes a little bit of coordination, reaching out to see who might be willing to do that, but that is an option. You may check with local congregations in your area. Do they have any accounting professionals in their congregation who might be willing to do this, you know, at maybe a lesser rate, or you know, something on their own, you know, just to do this work. So you have to do what works within your means, and, you know, use your resources, collaborate with those around you, ask questions. We do get asked, especially lately, I've gotten asked a lot, do you have a list of what, you know, accounting people do these things? And I don't, because congregations don't normally tell us if they've used somebody, which is why on the registration for this event, I asked that question to try to, maybe we could start compiling some resources. If somebody has used a professional firm that understands religious nonprofits and is reasonable. Full-blown audits with a professional organization can cost, you know, $7,000 to $15,000. You know, they're expensive. So, you know, it's hard for most congregations to be able to afford that. These are the things that an audit should do. And you're looking at reports, you're looking at receipts, you're looking at bank accounts, reconciliations, you're verifying the debt owed by the congregations. You're looking at how expenses are recorded and approved and what process is used for that. You're looking at money and how the money is treated and handled. And especially, this is something unique to congregations, is you're given a lot of funds that are designated for a specific purpose. And part of the review is to make sure that when those funds are expended, that they're expended for the purpose that they were given for. And that's part of the trust that you're given by your donors, is that when they give for something and they've designated that, it's going to be dispersed for that reason, or for that purpose. And then the other things, in addition to financial transactions, an auditor is going to look at the controls in place, the accounting controls, to make sure that there's some oversight, that there's a segregation of duties. If I had to say what is some of the biggest, the most important parts of protecting your assets and the processes that you do, is the separation and segregation of duties, that you don't have one person handling something from start to finish, or that you don't have just one set of eyes on money coming in and going out, so that there's multiple people looking at things. That makes it less likely that there's going to be any form of impropriety if you've got some checks and balances in there to make sure that there are steps followed and different people are seeing these transactions at different stages. Reasonableness of systems and procedures, and in light of all factors. In light of all factors is important, because what a large congregation can do as far as systems and procedures versus a small congregation is very different. But even small congregations can have procedures, can even have written procedures, and what we do and how we do it to ensure that things are done in the best way possible. You want to make sure that you're looking at your insurance coverage. You've got all the policies in place and that are current that you need. That you have a method for keeping your meeting minutes, and especially looking at those that have financial implications, and that you keep good records of those financial gifts that you're given through donors. When you're reviewing things, you're going to look at the church records, but you're also going to look at other organizations that might be using the same taxpayer ID number that your church is. So if you have a preschool and they're using the church's tax ID number to operate, then the review needs to include those preschool records. If sometimes you may have a preschool that uses your facility, rents your facility, but they're operating on their own, then you do not have to do that. If you have a WELCA or a Women of the ELCA group that might have a separate account, they probably operate that account under your church's tax ID number, then you would at least need to see some reporting of that. A foundation or endowment funds, many churches have an endowment committee and think, well, we've got a committee and they handle that, but they're operating under the church's tax ID number. And so you need to make sure that your council has responsibility and oversight over that, even if there's an actual board managing the funds themselves. You know, they're ultimately the buck stops with the council, anything under that tax ID number. Sometimes it's not very common in these days, but often you'll have there were youth group accounts or your youth had a different account, all of those things. So, all right, we're going to stop once again for questions.
I have a question, Terry.
Yep.
When you're talking about an audit, I'm talking from the bookkeeper standpoint. I have like a couple of accounts that are on Autopay.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else sees those. How does that work?
Yeah. So I'll mention it a little bit later, but
Okay.
that any type of Autopay creates a challenge because it can be initiated by one person. So,
Right.
there's a couple ways you can do this, but if you have anytime you set up an Autopay for something, I would recommend that you have either in your policies or maybe once a year in your church council minutes, somehow saying these are the accounts that will be paid with Autopay.
Oh,
And it's helpful if it's a recurring amount, you can put the amount in there. But if it's something that has a fluctuating amount like a utility bill, there should be some process or somebody approving that. You can do a lot of stuff by email, but just to say these are the bills that are going to be paid by Autopay this month, and you just do the best you can. I think we've all learned a lot how to get. I know in my role here, there's hardly any of us in the office, and so I need stuff approved, and I do a lot of approvals by email. And it's a lot of work. It's way easier to have somebody down the hall approve something, but I do it, and I do it to protect myself, that I always have, someone approving what I do. So.
Okay. And the same goes for vouchers too. That was my other question. Yeah. How do you do that? Because we didn't see council members for a year.
Right. You can. I used to, in a congregation I served, every week I would send our treasurer the list of bills I had to pay, and I'd make a spreadsheet and I'd email it to him, and he would, give his approval to pay it. And so then I had some backup saying these are my authors. So I didn't have approval on each individual bill, but I had approval on a list of bills that I was going to pay.
And would you have him sign that prior, or, you know what I mean? Like after or prior to the bill?
Usually prior, but a lot of times I would have to I would prepare the checks.
Yeah.
And then I'd send that to him and then get that back from me. He got it back to me pretty quickly. So,
okay. Let me one more question on this. On this spreadsheet, would you just have him blanketly approve it? Or
there would be a place at the bottom for him to approve all of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
You have a hand, Terry.
Oh, sorry.
That's
Yolanda, okay. But I don't think you're Yolanda.
No.
Yes, I am.
You are.
I am.
Oh, you are.
I am. My question is if you have an endowment fund, but
Mhm.
they have a separate ID from the church,
Mhm.
do we have any responsibility, obligation?
Not in your review, you don't. I would say that your endowment fund, you have a board that oversees that,
We have a committee.
a committee. Then I would say they should provide at least quarterly reporting to your council. It is a separate tax ID number, so it wouldn't be part of the review, but does the endowment, does that appear on your balance sheet anywhere? For
I
the
believe it
church?
does. I believe
Yeah.
it does.
So just in the interest of, council has that responsibility for those funds,
Okay, thank you.
So Terry, there's also one comment, Incarnation of Poway. They have done the reciprocal arrangements with the auditing and they're willing to do it in the past. So if your
Nice.
congregation is near, there's a congregation willing to reciprocate the process with you.
I'll note that so that I know, but I'm wondering, I need to put together an evaluation for this, and maybe I can add that if you're interested in doing that, to respond, and then I can, put a list up when I put these resources of these are the congregations and their locations. Does that sound like a helpful way that people can say what congregations might be willing to do that?
Yes.
Okay, I will do that. And thank you. I'm glad that has worked out. That's something that I know is tricky to set up, but it can be very helpful, especially in congregations where you're pretty near to each other. All right, anything else before we move on? All right, here we go back to the clunky, start it back up again. So now we're going to get into the parts, what records are needed to do this review, and then some of the steps in doing so. So the first thing you want to do is, once you've set when you're going to do this review, you want to give the person that has to get these records together and organized a little bit of leeway. You don't want to say, okay, we want to do it next week. Try to give a month, like decide when this is going to happen, for what period. Usually you would do, the times you usually do these are at the end of your calendar or fiscal year. You also, it's encouraged to do when you have a change in treasurer and often a change in pastor. Not that the pastor is necessarily involved in anything, but then it gives your new incoming pastor the assurance that, that's often when you update your constitution or you look at all these things to make sure that when you're bringing in a new pastor, they're coming into like a clean slate of things. Same thing is true when your treasurer change. You want your incoming treasurer to know, okay, I'm not inheriting some problem from before. So there's both in the ELCA guide and in the template, there's a list of what type of things to get together. But the next two slides will show you some of the things that you get together. If you wonder why do you need to look at minutes, well, you need to look at minutes to see where they're only for the sake of financial implications. Were there things in the minutes that we were supposed to pay out? Were there things that were supposed to be designated for something, and how were those handled? And so although you have to look through all the minutes, the parts that will be relevant to the review are those financial areas. You want to look at financial statements for the audit year. And you really want to look at what financial statements were given to your council. This review wants to make sure that your council has been presented with the fair and accurate financial statements. In my time here, we've had small number of improprieties in congregations, and in at least 2 that I know of, it wasn't found out for a while because the council got totally different financial statements than the real financial statements. So the council thought everything was going well, and it was just because that wasn't the accurate picture. So so we want to look at, and your council should be getting financial statements on at least a monthly basis. I know sometimes something will come up where maybe you won't have financial statements in time for a meeting, but you should still get that after the meeting, and to make sure that those you're not going months without something. You want to look at all bank and investment account statements and reconciliations. Journal entries, adjustments, invoices, payroll, online banking, and we've talked about that. The financial secretary, often congregations, they may not call the person a financial secretary, but whatever that person that has oversight and probably works with your counters for donations, and the person that would prepare the donation statements. You want to look at insurance policies and then annual reporting, and we'll discuss that annual reporting a little bit later. After you've determined when your review and audit's going to be, and you let the person know that needs to get all together all these records, the next thing I like to do is have either an in-person, or as we've learned over the last couple of years, you can do this over Zoom, but an introductory meeting between those who are on your audit committee and your congregational treasurer, your financial secretary, and you may want to include others involved in the financial processes. So if you have a bookkeeper or someone actually doing the work, or your office administrator, if they're heavily involved. If you're looking at preschool records, you may want to have your preschool director in there. It is just a way to talk through what are the processes, what happens, tell us how, what happens when a bill comes in, who does it go to? Does it go for approval? What are the steps? What happens with the offering? When is it counted? Who counts it? Is there a form filled out? When is it taken to the bank? Just to kind of give your committee an overview of what processes are in place. And often when you're looking at records, you might see names or signatures, just so you understand like who signs the checks, who is involved in this. It just helps, and it also helps those people. It is a little unnerving. I sometimes to think, oh, someone's going to check all my work for the last year, and trust me, I do it every year with our Synod auditors. And what did I do everything right, or do I remember why I did things? And so just kind of set them at ease and let them know that this is to protect them as well, and to learn how we can do things, better, and make sure that we've got enough, sets of eyes on things so that everything is protected. This will allow you, I think, to be able to get ready for your work. If you have any written financial policies and procedures, great, take a look at those. And especially if it's something that you've taken the time to put together. If you don't, this is a great time to start working on that. And they can be as simple as just writing down the steps of how, bills are approved and what happens. It will also help if you have a change in personnel or the people doing that work, that there's some written form of how things are handled. The next thing I would do is prepare bank or donor confirmation letters. And these are letters that are sent to your banks to confirm balances as of a certain time. The ELCA audit guide has an example of one on page 23. The donor confirmation letter is sent to donors in your congregations. There's a sample of that on page 24. You don't have to send it to every donor. The ELCA recommends a sampling of a minimum of 1% of your congregation donors. And when I choose who I send it to, I usually pick a variety of, large donors, small donors, donors who give to a variety of funds, just to kind of spread it out. Maybe some who have been members for a long time, some who are fairly recent, just so that you kind of get a good sampling. And that's important to note in this, that you're not looking at every financial transaction for a year. You're looking at a sample of them. The ELCA guide has some percentages, like a sampling of 10% of this or 1% of this. And the template, I had some guidelines that I usually use, like how many I look at. But again, it's not every transaction, but it's helpful if one of the set records you get is a general ledger, which will show you every transaction for the year. And then you can kind of pick out, like, oh, here's a big one, or here's a different one, here's one that's a utility, kind of spread things out. You can also request confirmation from the Synod in what the Synod has recorded your giving to be. There is no sample letter for that. If you send me an email or a letter saying, we'd like to confirm what the Synod shows our gifts to be, give me the time period and I'll respond to that. So those I usually try to do first, because it can take a while to get those back. I know the ELCA guide says for donors a minimum of 1%. I usually do 5%, only because then maybe you'll get back 1 or 2% because you don't get them all back. And with your bank, I would, if you have a banking relationship with a certain branch or a banker, I would let them know you're doing this and ask them where the best place to send that letter to, because often it may not be your branch. It may be a corporate office. And something that I found last year is one bank was going to charge to do that. And the reason people ask all the time, why do you need a confirmation letter? You have the bank statement. This is just confirming that that bank statement wasn't mocked up in some way or a falsified document. And then the first area we start to look at is your banking and investments. And these are some of the main steps in doing that. Again, both the template and the audit guide will go through specific individual steps, but these are kind of the broader, and so you can kind of see what you're looking for. You do want to check and see how many signers, who the signers are on your accounts when you do that initial interview. And you want to look and see, are those the people that are signing the checks? Do your checks require 2 signatures or 1? Are those guidelines being followed? And you also want to confirm, and this is where the financial statements come in, where the financial statements that were presented to your council, does that accurately represent what the reconciled balances were? And so when you close out a month and you print you issue your financial statements, you reconcile your accounts, you have an ending cash balance for that month, a reconciled balance. What I see very often in congregations is after that's done, a transaction or multiple transactions will continue to be recorded against the cash account after it's reconciled. Don't continue to record those cash transactions. You can record them, using an accrual or a bill payment system, but don't affect that cash balance if you've already reconciled it. If you have any type of petty cash accounts, Less common these days, but if you do want to confirm that what's in that petty cash balance. And then you're going to start looking at income and receipts. And this is an area that is, again, a sampling, a test basis. Look at what your counters who are counting your offerings, if there's a form that they complete when they do that, and look at a sampling of those forms, make sure they match what is being put in the general ledger and what is recorded as income. Look at that process for how offering is handled. You know, whether it's deposited right away, whether it's not counted for a few days. There's lots of guidelines on best practices for keeping your offering and your income safe. And then as your donor confirmations come back in, make sure that amount that is verified matches with what your financial secretary has recorded. In reviewing disbursements, again, look at council minutes. You're going to look at a sampling of expenses and look at what backup documentation is kept, whether there's an approval process for that, and whether things are paid accurately and they're classified properly. I usually try to use 10 type of varying expenses per quarter. So you're looking at 40 transactions for the year. I can't stress enough how important it is to who's ever paying your bills to make sure that they're keeping invoices, check requests, whatever documentation is needed. And I know it's hard when something is maybe an automatic withdrawal from your account, but every automatic withdrawal, even if it's set up as a standard recurring thing, has the ability to go into your account and print some type of invoice or receipt for that. It does take time. It's easier just to record an automatic transaction and not do that. But you want to, again, protect that you've got documentation for what was paid. And come up with whatever system works for you with getting approval on things. The key in the disbursement area is that you've got different stages of it. You've got the person preparing the check. You've got a person approving the bill. You've got a person signing the check. And then you have a person doing a reconciliation. That's 4 potential different people you can have involved. If you've got 4 different people involved in that process, you've got all those sets of eyes on the disbursements going out. If some of those areas, and very often the person preparing the check is the person reconciling the account, make sure the other 2 areas are other different people. You know, try to keep preferably 3 to 4 people involved in that process, but no less than 2. And so that prevents somebody from dispersing money. And then if they're reconciling the checking account, nobody has ever then seen that process. It's just makes it way too easy for someone when they know. And this is what makes it hard, is we're all thankful when someone's willing to do that work. And if they're willing to do that work, and you know, we involve as less people, it seems like, oh, this is great, you know, they're handling it all, I trust them. But they should not let you do that. You need to have other people involved in that process. And your approval of bills should be someone who understands what that expense is for, or if it's a repair, that they can say, yes, that repair was done according to what we asked for. You know, if I'm given a bill, I can't approve it if I don't know what happened. You know, I see a bill, but I don't know, did that actually take place? Were they happy with the work? Did we get those things we ordered? So make sure it's someone logical in that. Reviewing payroll, again, you're going to select a sample, and whether you do your payroll in-house or whether you have a company do it, each payroll should have a payroll register, which shows all of the people who were paid and their their pay, their withholdings. Choose one of those, match it with what's in your general ledger to make sure that was recorded properly. A big thing is to make sure your employees are classified right, as correctly as exempt or non-exempt. Exempt in the case of someone who's paid a salary or a flat amount versus non-exempt people who are paid hourly and who can overtime needs to be paid. And over the last, I don't know, 5-6 years, the state has cracked down on that because congregations, churches are notorious for not paying people correctly in this sense. If someone is non-exempt and paid hourly, there should be some type of time card. It can be, there's online things to do, record that. It can be a timesheet. It doesn't have to be a certain type, as long as their hours are being recorded and somebody is approving those before they are paid. So a supervisor who knows can say, yes, I sign off on this. You also need to look at quarterly payroll tax returns and the W-2s. You need to make sure that those match what's in your general ledger. You need to look at things like W-4s, which is the forms where your employees are indicating their withholding. Clergy, it's optional whether you have them fill out a W-4. Clergy do not have withholding, so that, you know, but often you can have them fill it out and just, you know, cross that part out, but that at least verifies their tax ID number. Clergy designate a portion of their compensation as housing allowance, and that needs to be done every year, and it should be done at the beginning of the year and noted in your council minutes. There's nothing that the council needs to do but, you know, receive that designation from your pastor and note it in the minutes. You don't have to say that's too much, that's too little. But this protects, and it's required by the IRS if your pastor's ever audited, they need to be able to prove that this was what they designated for that year, and your minutes are the only way to do that. Independent contractors, if you have any independent contractors who are paid $600 or more in a calendar year and they're not a corporation, they need to be issued a 1099 at year end. What I usually do is ask for, most accounting programs will allow you to print out a list of disbursements by vendor for the year, and then I look through and see how many were paid this and should they have received a 1099. W-9s are forms that are collected to get the taxpayer ID number from any independent contractor you're using. You want to get those from every one of your independent contractors, even if you know that they're a corporation, because that way you've got it on file that they've indicated that they're a corporation, they've provided that tax ID number for you. You don't have to issue them a 1099. But you've got that form on file that you've done your due diligence in getting that information. What I always say to congregations is the very first time you use a vendor, get that W-9 form from them before you give them their first check. And then you always know that once, you know, the first time you've used that vendor, you know you have that form, and so you don't have to worry midway through the year, am I going to go over $600? And also it's much easier to get that form from them while they're waiting. If you say, I can't give you your first check until I get that, than it is at the end of the year when you look and see, oh, we've paid them $600 or more, and now I'm going to try to get it from them. And it's a little bit less motivation for them to get that back to you, especially if you're not using them anymore. I promise we're almost done with this section. Government filings, these are the two government filings that you want to look for. The state nonprofit corporation statement of information. It's called an SI 100 in California, and it's filed every other year. It just lists your officers, and you can list your church address as their address. It's just something that has to be on file for you to keep your nonprofit corporation status. You can go online, and if you don't know that if that's been filed, you can go online and look that up, and it can tell you, see when the last time you filed that is. In Hawaii, I haven't looked at the list. I don't know if we have any Hawaii people with us tonight. Their forms are still filed every year. And then if you have a change in your officers, your president, president, secretary, treasurer, I think vice president, now I can't remember. If you change any of those in between your filing year, especially in California where there's that 2-year gap, you are supposed to file a new form, and there's like a $20 fee to file it every other year. But if you have to make changes in between, they don't charge a fee for doing that. And then from your county, you will be sent a property tax exemption report every year. Many years ago, it used to be as simple as just a postcard that you checked off, yes, our property is being used for the same purpose. You are given a religious exemption, and which is why churches pay very little property tax. But that can be in jeopardy if you have other groups who are not religious nonprofits. Not just nonprofits, but religious nonprofits. Your exemption is based on religious use. So, and that most counties now have a very detailed report that you have to fill out, where they ask you to list all the other organizations using your property. And it's a challenge to be able to report all those people and to know. So if you have someone new using your property, make sure they have filed for that religious exemption as well. If you have like 12-step groups meeting at your congregation, obviously they're not religious exemption. This has to do with people who are paying for the use of your property, which is why most congregations, if they're not providing the space for free to these groups, they're calling it a donation. You know, and it's not something that's required, because then you're not renting that out to them. You're going to review insurance policies. You don't have to look over the whole policy, just ask for the declarations page. And if you don't have those in the file, you should be able to get those from your insurance agent. And these are the type of policies most congregations have. Accident and medical, not all have, but the other ones you would. And you just want to make sure the policy is in place, that the limits seem reasonable for the size of your congregation. If you're not sure, you can talk to the agent and just make sure that those are all reasonable and in place. You also want to confirm that the premiums that are listed are there, what was paid. And then you want to look at the financial reports, as we talked about, make sure that they're presented in a consistent time frame, and that they reflect accurate and a complete picture. Make sure that your budget is approved at a congregational meeting. And then you want to look at the year-end balance sheet from the prior year end and compare it with the year end that you're reviewing. If there's any significant changes, you want to note that in your report, and make sure, if you don't understand why there was that significant change, that you get some either are able to find the documentation of what constituted that, or have a conversation with the treasurer to find out. But those should be reported in your auditor's your audit report. So this was the biggest, toughest section. So we're going to take a break and ask questions, answer any questions I can. Betty Dagan.
We have a preschool that uses our facility. Do I have to do anything special about them? They are obviously not religious, but they pay us a nice chunk of change.
Yeah. Do they have chapel?
Not with us.
Yeah.
Well, I think they do,
Yeah.
but we don't provide the.
Yeah, I don't No, because usually most preschools have some form of chapel, and that's how they get that religious. I don't know. I would have to find out.
I can check on that.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a
I-
lot of people from Biola are involved, so I'm
Mhm.
sure there's something religious going on,
yeah.
but not under our auspices.
Right. They're operating under a separate tax ID number, right?
Right, yeah. And we have a contract with them
Yeah,
on how much they are to pay us.
yeah. Yeah, let's talk about that and see, but you might check and see, are they offering any type of religious service, instruction, anything? Especially if they're affiliated with Biola, they might be. So that's a good question.
Dang.
Sorry, I don't have a definite answer for you, but I will look into it.
I do have something really funny to lighten the load a little bit. When
Okay,
I first became treasurer, they put me on the thing so I could sign checks. And I ended up signing a check with a PO that was written to me, approved by me, and I signed the check for it.
Yeah.
I got real involved in internal controls after that.
yeah. You just have to watch it, and you just find someone, you have to be creative, especially when
Yeah.
there's not a lot of people around, is who can have some oversight. I mean, they have to have knowledge. You can't just find somebody walking down the hall and say, hey, sign off on this. But
No,
I mean,
and
you
every-
do have to think about who can provide that oversight, and it's to protect you,
And we've come up with and I've notified everybody, you
Yeah.
can't prove your own PO.
Right. Or sign your own check, a check payable to you.
Yeah, right.
So, all right, I see two hands. Yolanda, we'll call on you first. Oh, be sure to unmute.
Sorry.
No worries.
Is it okay for a person to approve an invoice and then sign the check?
Do you have, and then how many other people? There's a different person preparing the check.
Yes,
Is there, who's doing the bank reconciliation?
another person.
So that's three people involved in that process?
Yes,
Yes.
it's okay.
Yep.
Okay,
So you figure 3 sets of eyes have seen that expense,
okay.
Yeah.
If it's only 2 people, sometimes is that
It's better than just one.
okay?
So,
Okay. And
I
my
mean,
go ahead.
sorry.
My second question is, it goes back to the previous issues. Is it okay for a treasurer from one church to go to another church and be part of their review committee?
Yes, that would be the kind of exchanging financial people, because they can't review their own, but they can review another, and they would have, kind of the knowledge of how church, not maybe how that specific church works, but they've got the background information. So,
Thank you.
and Dana.
Hi, good afternoon or good evening. I have a question on the independent contractor information.
Mhm.
And my question is, so obviously, I just want to clarify, if a vendor is incorporated, then the 1099 is not necessary.
Correct.
Okay, so we utilize a particular individual to do a lot of maintenance work, but he is incorporated. He has his LLC. And since he has that, we are not obligated to provide him a 1099, but we probably need to obtain his W-9 for our records.
I do. I mean, anybody can put incorporated on a
Invoice.
invoice. And the thing is, once they've given you that W-9, they've self-identified, and you've done your due diligence in collecting that from them.
Okay.
You do want to make sure, this is not part of the review, but you do want to make sure that they can provide proof that they have insurance. So that because if they're an independent contractor, but they're working at your church and they get hurt and they don't have their own insurance, they can go against your insurance. So you can ask for a certificate of their liability insurance.
Okay, so in addition to the W-9, we should request a certificate of their liability insurance.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's
Yeah.
very helpful. I appreciate
And
that.
sometimes churches may use a independent contractor who's just, a single person doing their work. And they would be covered under your insurance. When you do your workers' comp audit at the end of the year, you have to list them and you might end up paying a little bit more for that, but because often in single people, doing, handyman type work may not have that. So, but talk to your insurance agent about that too. So.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Appreciate this. Thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate you being here from Hawaii.
Yes.
I do see that someone's asked about can't find the resource section on the website. Are you looking at the ELCA website?
Yeah, I'm looking at the ELCA website and I just found it's down below in a box. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it then. Got it
Yeah.
then.
Okay.
Found it.
There
I was
you go.
looking across the top.
Good hunting. Yeah. Yeah. And if you look, and once you get in that financial, click on that financial box, it immediately takes you into the congregation list, but you'll see some other tabs. The congregation tab has the most stuff, but you're welcome to look at the other stuff too. There's some interesting stuff and they change it up quite a bit. So you check back from time to time.
Terry, there's another question. It says from Jeremy, it says, could you describe how to review insurance policies and what are you looking for? So
primarily you're looking for, is this coverage period current? And then you're also looking for the premium amount. Does that match what we've paid? And the limits, usually certain things have $1 million, some have 2 million. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I'm not an insurance expert. So sometimes I'll have to contact the insurance agent and say, is this your standard, amount for the church this size? There's not very many times you're going to find that they're underinsured because especially if it's an insurance agent that works with a lot of congregations, they're pretty in tune with what you would need for that. So, but those are the three things, that the coverage is current, that the premiums match with what is paid, and that the coverage limit is reasonable for that congregation. They're not underinsured.
Terry, I got a question.
Yep.
Not even a question, just a statement. Thank you. On your template, you talk about the fidelity coverage for counters and anybody who deals with money. We called Nancy today, their office. We use Nancy Bond's office, and they were able to tell us right away that, because that was the only thing that we had questions about. We do everything on your template, except for we weren't sure that language. So thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you.
And they do cover it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, sometimes they're kind of buried within congregation in policies,
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Are we good to move on to the last section? Okay, we're going to go for it. We have 20 minutes. I want to get you out of here on time. All right. This is so clunky each time to get back in here. So the last area that you really want to look at, we've talked about this, is the internal controls. And so as you're reviewing these things, it'll become apparent if there's not some type of systematic way of doing things that's consistent. And this really is the heart of what we want to do with this review is, is to see how are our processes working? How can we do this better? What things can we do within the means that we have and the people that we have? And so this doesn't matter whether it's a large congregation or a small congregation. This is the key to this. And so these are some of the tips to make sure that duties are split. You want to keep those people handling your income separate from those handling your expenses. So those involved in the income processes should not be involved in disbursements. People that do the audit review should not only not be involved in the financial process, not related to your financial secretary or treasurer. You want to make sure that when your offering is being counted, it's being counted by two unrelated people, which I know makes it hard because often a husband and a wife went to count because that means only one person has to stay after church or come in together. But for their protection, they should be unrelated. And receipt and disbursement functions should have different people involved in the process. We talked about review and approval of bills. You want to make sure that, you know, as many people as you can involve in that process, but at least try to have 3 at least. And if you have to have just 2, try to keep that to a minimum. It's always recommended to have 2 signers, but we know, especially in these days where people are working remotely, that often isn't the best way or the most streamlined way of doing things. If you don't have 2 people signing the check, make sure that the signer isn't the person performing the bank reconciliation, because what you want to prevent is the ability for someone to sign a check and nobody catches that expense went out and wasn't, you know, approved or signed. If the same person is doing the reconciliation, that can happen. We talked a little bit about online transactions and an approval process for that. Just try to think about it in the way of, you know, protecting your back. You know, like, okay, I want to make sure that no one can ever accuse me of not having, you know, just pushing something through and getting it, you know, done without somebody else seeing it. Preferable that your bank reconciliations, it's not someone who approves or signs checks or makes deposits. Again, another set of eyes looking at the things that are on there. Once you've reviewed all of this, it's time to prepare your report, and it is a written report that gets presented. If you have a finance committee, it would get presented to the finance committee and definitely the congregation council. The written report, there's a sample one in the ELCA audit guide on page 25, and these are the things it details. What steps are taken, and you don't have to like say, here's this whole big template, here's all my steps. There's a good summary of those steps in the sample one that's on page 25. You want to be able to list what items you reviewed, again, general, broad categories. If there were certain things that you asked for that you weren't provided, I definitely would put those in the report, just to say we weren't able to look at these. They weren't available. Then a conclusion and a sample of what that conclusion looks like is in there, but it just identifies the material accuracy of the records you sampled, you know, and you can say something to the effect of, you know, given what we looked at, we feel that and the term materially really means, you know, overall what we were able to review, we can have some confidence in our financial statements. And then if you have any broad themed recommendations or comments, you can list those, like, you know, we encourage you to get another person involved in the, you know, the disbursement process. But what I would do always, I encourage you to, before you issue any written reports, that you sit down with your treasurer and financial secretary, if you have one, and say, these are the areas of concern I have, or these are the questions I have. I need some help with this, and try to rectify any questions or issues to see is there some documentation you didn't get, you want to or is there something that I didn't completely understand, and so I didn't look in a certain area. You want to be able to let them have the opportunity to resolve any issues before you put them in your report. And if for some reason you find something that is really disconcerting, then you want to sit down with your treasurer. But if you think it involves your treasurer, then you want to talk to your council president and or pastor, about it. But usually you want to be able to give people the opportunity to answer any questions before they end up in a report that goes to council. And then once you're all happy with, what things that you recommend, you're ready to write up that report. I do often in my reports put in the conclusion, I acknowledge the work that people are doing, and take into consideration the size of your congregation and the amount of people involved. Just if you're going to say, well, more people should, acknowledge the fact that given the fact that we've got a small congregation and this is done by volunteers, but make sure that your report has some grace and appreciation for the work that's being done in that as well. And then this report would go to your finance committee and congregation council. It is not something that is typically shared with the whole congregation. If somebody asked for it, by all means, you would, they have the ability to see it, but it's not something that you usually broadly, put out with your annual report. You can say that, this was presented and your council, it would be presented at a council meeting, and then the council meeting would vote to accept it. Then you've got it in the minutes that it was done. And it does not need to be sent to the synod. Many years ago, the ELCA had a form where you completed it and it was submitted to the synod. Sometimes I still get those forms. Those old forms are around somewhere. People are finding them, or they had them in their records, and they'll send them to the synod, and I put them in your congregation file. But it's not, again, because just like the ELCA, we can't require it. So if we required it, then we would say you have to send them in, and we have to check off that everybody's done that. So we're going to go to the very last part for any additional questions. This slide has my contact information on it, not because I'm expecting you to write it down right now, but because you have a printout of that slide. And I can also put it in the chat. So let me stop sharing my screen. And then I see a hand. I see two hands. Jeremy.
Thanks, Terry. Do you have any words of wisdom on the use of debit credit cards issued in the congregation's accounts?
Yeah. One of the resources on the ELCA financial page is credit card best practices. My words of wisdom would be to come up with, make sure it's in the minutes, who's going to have that credit card in their name and what your procedures are for use of it. Some congregations will say that person can charge up to a certain amount without getting pre-approval. I served in a congregation where I had to get things approved before I had to give our treasurer the heads up, like, I want to use it for this. And it was a pain. And I knew, but our procedure said that if I didn't do that, and then after the fact was told, nope, that wasn't appropriate, then I would be responsible to pay that. So, it just depends on, how large of a limit you have, how much you're willing to let somebody put out there. I would strongly recommend that if that somebody other than the person whose name is on the card is approving the credit card bill, and that there's a process for submitting all receipts, and to come up with a process for you're not scurrying around trying to get those receipts at the time the bill needs to be paid. So Daryl.
Yeah, so COVID resulted in our not being able to complete an audit for one of our fiscal years.
Mhm.
How are we able to combine 2 fiscal years and do one kind of blanket 2-year audit?
I've reviewed 2 years for a congregation once, so you can, yeah.
Thank you. You just made my day.
Terry, the folks at San Clemente have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, folks at San Clemente.
Well, hi, Terry. It's Linda Hardy.
Linda.
You did a great job for us a couple of years back. But one of the impressions I got when that happened, I know you did everything. You did all the months. You reconciled every single month and checked everything. But I kind of got the impression that for our really small congregation that we could do like a sampling. Like, for instance, I understand, the letters going out to just a few, just randomly pick people and that kind of thing. But I got the impression that maybe we could, like, for instance, if we're looking at the counters reports, instead of looking at every single month, we could take a specific month and do a reconciliation for just that month. Is that correct? Or are you recommending like doing the whole shebang for every single month as far as?
I usually choose for the counters reports, I would choose one report per month. And
just one report per month?
Yes.
Oh, not just
Yeah.
one.
So like for January, I choose 1 week's counters report to look at. And then
Okay.
February, it just, it really, sometimes you'll find like, oh, everything's reconciling, it's all great, and you might say, okay, I'm gonna do once every 2 months, but and the one per month allows me, when I do them, to get a variety of weeks. Like some weeks are higher, usually the first week of the month is higher than the last week of the month, so I kind of rotate them so I could get a good sampling of it. So
Okay. And then as far as, the closings, do we look at every single month's closing statement and make sure that it reconciles to the bank statement?
you mean on the, like, comparing it to the general ledger?
Right.
I usually do, but that's just me. It's easier to find where an error might be, or to tie in a number that doesn't jive if I'm looking at every month. I would say you at least need to do 1 per quarter.
1 per quarter.
Yeah.
Right.
The ELCA guide has, I'll have to look at what page it was on. But it has, like, for this type of thing, do this percentage, and this type of thing, do this percentage. So you can go by that too. So. Okay,
we've got some guidelines then, written guidelines for that. Okay, great. I was just concerned that we'd have to dot every I and cross every T for everything. Okay, thank you.
So I'm assuming in the chat, this is Carla who's asking the question about the template, and so I think I forwarded you an email this afternoon after I registered you that had a link to the template and the PowerPoint slides and the audit guide. So, but I'll send all of you out again those documents after this meeting, so you will have them all again, and eventually they will be on the website by the end of April.
So I don't know, Yolanda, do you have a question? No. Okay.
Oh, Daryl, do you have another question?
Daryl has another question, I think.
Okay.
I don't. I just couldn't figure out how to unraise my hand.
I'll do your reactions. Yeah, you can lower hand.
Thank you.
I forget all the time when I raise my hand not to put it down. Betty Dagan. Yeah, I can see Betty Dagan. The problem with 2 screens is if you just raise your hand and you're not on my screen, I don't see you. So. Did you have a question, Betty, or were you just waving? Oh, okay. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up? Ooh, we have 3 minutes, you guys. Well, I just want to say how much I appreciate you guys taking an evening to listen to this, because it's not, like I said at the beginning, it wouldn't be my way of spending an evening, but I will get an evaluation sent out to all of you by the end of the week. And I'll add something that if you are interested in doing any type of collaborative swaps for these reviews, that you can give me a contact number, and you know, I'll be happy to compile a list. So thank you to all of you. As promised, I'm going to ask somebody to pray us out, and so who would like to do that?
So Terry, I'll do it so you don't have to worry about that awkward silence of anybody.
I'm pretty good with awkward silence, you know, I can wait out people. But
Well,
thank you.
I'm good at it too, when, you know, I want other people to be a part of it, but I'll help you out.
Okay, and I'll stick around if there's any specific questions people have after we pray out. So
The Lord be with you. Gracious God, we thank you for this time to go over the stewardship of our congregations, to be better financially prepared as we move into the future. We thank you for each individual on this call as they continue the financial ministry in their congregations. As we go this evening, help us to get rest and renewed for the day ahead. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen.
amen. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.